Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for coffee this morning and a chat with Katie Harbison, who is the president of the Chambliss Center for Children. My name is Molly Blankenship, and I'm the executive director of Chattanooga 2.0. We are the cross-sector partnership working across Chattanooga and Hamilton County to transform education and workforce development outcomes, ultimately ensuring that we have an inclusive economy where everyone has access to social and economic mobility. And we do our work by convening partners through action teams, working to align policy and practice, and make sure that students have access to educational and career opportunities that will allow them to unlock their full potential. And throughout the month of April, Chattanooga 2.0 has been championing the importance of early childhood. It's really the foundational and an initial, most critical piece of our work in the early stages. And Katie not only is the president of the Chambliss Center for Children, but also the co-chair of the Early Matters Chattanooga Action Team. And so Katie, thank you so much for joining me this morning for a chat. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So why don't we start, if you don't mind, would you tell us a little bit about the Chambliss Center for Children and who you are in a nutshell and what you do?
Well, the nutshell version is that we take care of children and support families. But we are a longstanding nonprofit here in Chattanooga. We have early childhood programs. We do foster care, residential care, adoptions. We have thrift stores. We provide support to child care programs throughout the city to make them more sustainable. So there's a lot of stuff we do. It would take all morning for me to probably give you all the details, but we're really just focused on children and supporting families in our city.
That's awesome. Thank you. Yeah, and in 3 years of being in Chattanooga, I've learned just what an anchor institution you all are and what a unique asset to our community. Why don't we, if it's okay, why don't we broaden out a little bit and talk about the coalition overall, Chattanooga 2.0 and Early Matters, and tell us what's the why behind this drive toward expanding access and quality and equity in early childhood services in this community?
Well, I think if you go really wide and you look at, wanting to have a qualified workforce, you really work your way all the way back to early childhood. There's really no way for us to have students enter kindergarten ready or to have adults ready for good paying jobs if they haven't had that great start. 80% of brain development happens by the age of 5. So when you look at children and you think, how can we help them succeed? You really have to look at those very first years and even maybe prenatally to realize that all of those neurons are firing and developing at those early ages. So it's really important for children to have high quality early childhood. We know through studies and looking at brain development that children who have those high quality early learning environments in those first years, really they do better in school. They go on to higher ed. They get more degrees. They get better jobs. And so, it's not just about making sure that our city is flourishing in 20 or 30 years, but it's also about making sure that those children have an amazing childhood and parents are supported. The interesting thing about early childhood is it's not just about making sure children are educated, it's also giving parents the ability to go to work and support their families and go to school. And so in my mind, I'm probably a little biased, but I think it's probably one of the best ways we can support children and families throughout the city, and because it helps in so many ways.
Yeah, agreed. The two things that always stick out to me when we're talking about early childhood is just that duality of how it's a tomorrow issue and a today issue. Yeah. And then also just all the research that points to the return on investment when you have effective interventions in those early years. Yeah, and we've known that, I think, at least among partners working in this space, we've known how important it is for a long time now. But it feels like the past year and the impacts of COVID have really propelled this conversation, especially about childcare, but about early learning and the toxic stress that young children have endured and that sort of thing, propelled all those issues to the forefront. So I'm curious just what your take is on how the childcare industry specifically, but maybe early learning in general, early childhood services have been impacted by the pandemic and what that's going to look like moving forward.
Well, I think the good thing that happened during the pandemic is that a lot of people realized how important and essential childcare and early childhood is to our economy, to parents, to children. And so, I think there are a lot of folks that are like, oh yeah, childcare, it's just what happens before K-12 education. And so, that's something that we try and educate folks on. But then the pandemic hit and everybody's going, well, what do I do with my kids? I have to go to work. And, so it was a hard time for childcare programs in a lot of ways. But then I also think the industry itself was elevated in a lot of ways. And we've seen a lot of support and a lot of advocacy on behalf of early childhood education programs and childcare programs, because people have seen how important they are. Going forward, I think we've still got a long way to go. I mean, if you just look at the financing of early childhood, it's really difficult. It's hard to make those profits and losses and those budgets meet up at the end of the day, especially when you're serving low income children. And so there's still a long way to go before we have enough early childhood spots for everyone who needs it. And hopefully some of the advocacy and some of the things that have happened during the pandemic are going to help with that. Now, what it's done, even though there were some good things, I think also what it's done is we've seen closures of childcare programs. We've seen childcare programs struggle even more to stay afloat because we've had to decrease capacity of children, which means a decrease in revenue. But we've had to increase some staffing, increase folks to take temperatures. A lot of childcare centers weren't even letting parents in the building, or might still not be letting parents in the building. And so you've got all those additional staff to run children to classrooms and back. And, so it's been a really, really hard time, but my hope is that really after the dust has settled and folks are back into their normal routines, that early childhood will emerge stronger and will be seen as a really, really important part of not just our economy, but of a child's educational journey.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you have children, Katie? I realize I don't know that.
I don't. I actually, we don't want to have children's, but I love being an aunt and an uncle, my husband being the uncle. And so we spend a lot of time with our nieces and nephews, and we both work with children, my husband and I. So it's kind of nice to come home to a quiet house.
To an adult only space.
Not gonna lie.
Yeah. Yeah.
We love kids, but
I get that. Yeah. Well, and the reason I ask is, one of my experiences through the pandemic was getting to understand the childcare challenges that we face directly. And I think that happened for a lot of parents who typically haven't gotten that real life experience to ask the question, what am I going to do with my child? Was pretty humbling.
I think that I felt the struggle of so many parents, not just single parents, but even, 2-parent homes have really struggled during the pandemic, even more so than, other households, because they have had to make hard decisions about who's going to work, who's not. We've seen a lot of women drop out of the workforce because there wasn't a safe childcare option for children. And so, it's been a really hard time for families with children. I've watched my sister and other friends who have really just struggled with, how do I do this? How do I keep my kids safe? At the end of the day, what's the most important thing? And so, I think it's been a really, really hard time for those parents that have children and have had to deal with the ups and downs and the ons and offs of schools and childcare programs. And I think there will be a huge sigh of relief from families when all this is over.
Agreed. And Katie, this one just popped into my head. So, I'm going for it.
Go for it.
But we're recording this on, April 21st, the day after the Derek Chauvin verdict. And I know that that George Floyd's death, first of all, the trial has really captivated the nation, but George Floyd's death spurred a nationwide reckoning with issues of racial justice. Certainly, a lot of it's focused on the criminal justice system, but we've been having conversations about how issues of racial equity and racial justice play into education and early childhood. And I'm just wondered if briefly you could touch on how the early childhood sector is thinking about issues of race playing into the work to expand access and quality.
Well, I think we've thought about it for a long time, and I think I'm hopeful, and I think that a lot of the recent conversations are going to propel some of those conversations and thoughts forward. But we've seen studies from decades ago saying that A lot of low income, a lot of minority children are not coming to kindergarten ready. And why is that? Because they didn't have an early childhood education program to go to. And so why is that? Because they couldn't afford to go to one, not because their parents didn't love them, or not because of anything else other than the fact that they didn't have the money to pay for a private early childhood program. And that's just heartbreaking, and so I think that's what a lot of the work that early childhood programs have been trying to do for a long time, is to make sure that every child, no matter what their economic situation, their race, their gender, whatever it is, that they enter kindergarten ready, because that's the way to get a good start in life. And it's not fair if somebody in this zip code didn't go and didn't get that just because their parents couldn't afford it. And so, I think, and again, I hope that folks will be more compelled to see the importance of providing early childhood experiences and opportunities for all children, even if their parents can't afford it, because it really is the best way to make sure that kids succeed in life. And so, we're talking about equity and in early matters, and we're talking about all the things that we need to be talking about. And I hope that we continue to push forward and continue to elevate the needs of, everyone in our city.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it feels like a unique opportunity to do that. And one of the things we've been talking a lot about in K-12 education is the fact that 70% of kids in our public school system fall into some sort of subgroup. They're a student of color, or an English language learner, economically disadvantaged, or a student with a disability. And so you can assume that that's probably around the same case for our students who are age 0 to 5, our young learners.
Right.
And so just really stresses to me the importance of ensuring those students have supports early on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And my last question for you is, we also are just coming off the heels of an election in Chattanooga. And Mayor Kelly has been such a champion of early childhood, both before and during his campaign. And I know that Early Matters is looking forward to the opportunity to work with his administration. I just wondered if you had any thoughts on what we should expect from the coming years from his administration, what we're hoping for, and maybe what's on the horizon.
Well, I think we are lucky to have had, two candidates in the runoff that were both talking and supportive of early childhood education. And that has not always been, or maybe ever been, the case. I think that is a reflection, again, of the importance that has been, or the light that has been shined on early childhood education during the pandemic. So I'm really excited that Mayor Kelly has talked about raises, for Head Start staff, which are in early childhood. He's talked about universal pre-K. We don't know yet what exactly that's going to look like, but I do think he's going to be willing to talk to Early Matters, so that whatever expansions we do in that early childhood space are done thoughtfully and equitably. And so I'm excited. I have no idea. I'm not going to make any guesses about what's going to happen, but Mayor Burke really started that Office of Early Learning and kind of instigated that early childhood focus for the city. And I'm excited to see Mayor Kelly continue that. Maybe there'll be an expansion of that Office of Early Learning. I think there are lots of options, and I'm excited to start working with the mayor to bring those to fruition here in Chattanooga.
Great. Me too. Katie, thank you so much for joining us.
Wow, thank you so much. Have a
Great to
great day.
talk to you.